On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audio-visual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC Podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. We are the official podcast of the Lot 1 tailgate party, which is at Lambeau Field every home game. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
I'm still in the afterglow of our great time in Pittsburgh, and so I'm having a beer that we had in Pittsburgh, the Helltown Brewery Bluff 78, a solid lineman number for a beer.
Nice.
Good evening, gentlemen. Because we have a special guest tonight.
Bakers, I can tell.
Yes. Kind of a special bourbon. This is the limited edition Maker's Mark Lost Recipe Series Edition 1 with mocha barrel staves.
Sounds delicious. I made a simple Irish coffee, and that's what I'm drinking tonight. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast Green Bay Chat. Just the audio is available on Apple Podcast as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. And this episode, it is a guest. It is our second time having a Green Bay Packer player on the GBC Podcast. Now, it's not a name that rolls off the tongue. Ed Konopasek. Folks around here just call him Big Ed. Ed, thanks for joining us. What are you drinking?
No, you bet. Hey, thanks for having me, guys. So I'm drinking out of my Big Ed Yeti, of course, and I'm drinking a Julius Sour. Kessler's, right, which is a staple blended whiskey here in Wisconsin. If you read the label, the guy's name is Julius Kessler. So I call this a Julius Sour. So it's basically a cheap whiskey sour, and I go through a lot of this, man. I don't have a drinking problem, but I got a lot of volume to fill up.
Well, there's a reason they call you Big Ed. Ed was an offensive lineman in his playing days. He's listed at 6'7", 310 pounds, and that's what we're going to talk about first to familiarize people with Ed's playing career in Green Bay. It was the 1987 season, and Jeff, there's something interesting about that 1987 season. If people remember it, that is a strike year, and it is a year that, for lack of a better term, replacement players came in and played 3 games for the Green Bay Packers.
That's right, John. It was a 24-day player strike. It was called after week 2. Week 3 was completely canceled. The NFL and the owners specifically, they needed players. They decided they were going to play with replacement players for weeks 4, 5, and 6. The strike actually ended before week 6, but the players ended up playing these 3 games. Most of the players were replacement players. Some NFL players did cross the picket lines, but this was pretty divisive. So not many players did. About 15% or so did cross. So the NFL needed these folks that this was their opportunity. So these are folks that maybe were standouts in college, weren't drafted, whatever. And so they had their opportunities to play.
So, Ed, here's your life story. In 1987, you actually came to town before all of this came about. You were in Green Bay as an undrafted player, and you're in camp. You're a young, fresh-faced guy, and you're thinking, hey, I'm going to go play professional football. How did you end up in Green Bay? Because like I said, you were undrafted. Did you have other teams take a look at you, and how did you choose Green Bay?
Never in my mind did it really occur to me that I was going to have an opportunity to play in the NFL. I headed into college only because, hey, look, this crazy organization was willing to pay for my education to come play football, a game that I loved, right? And to hang around with people and to build that locker room camaraderie that I just so desired. And it was probably about my junior year in college that my offensive line coach mentioned to me, I'd gotten a letter from the Dallas Cowboys. I brought it into practice one day. Dave Magazoo was my offensive line coach in college. I called him Mags. I said, Mags, what the hell is this? And he goes, dude, you're 6'8", you weigh 320 pounds. You're going to have an opportunity to play in the NFL. And I'm like, what? And so that was like the first time that it occurred to me that, holy cow, maybe, who knows, there would be an opportunity to play in the NFL. And honestly, it probably frightened me more than anything because it just never really had occurred to me. And so at that point, things started to happen, right? I started to have various teams, reach out and that type of thing. Just kind of keeping in loose contact. To be very honest, most of it was correspondence. This is before email, this is before text, right? Before cell phones, right? So most of it was just correspondence, written letters and things like that. And there were probably 4 or 5 teams that had expressed some level of interest. Hey, we know you're out there. We hope you have a great senior season, et cetera, so on, right? My senior season comes along. Incidentally, I got married that year, so that was weird. I was like one of the only guys in college that got married. My wife is a rocket scientist. She had finished school in like 3 years, right? So she's fully employed as a nurse, and we're rolling in the dough, right? Living in married housing. I got a scholarship. I got a book allowance. My wife's making great dough. So life was really good. And I've got this opportunity, who knows, maybe to play in the NFL. And my senior season, unfortunately, I had a catastrophic injury, broke my foot, required surgery, and I missed like the first, 6 games of my senior season. So a lot of the interest, from the NFL started to wane a bit because I just, I wasn't playing. But, towards the end of the season, I got back in and strapped it back up and got back out there and, tried to salvage the season. Teams started to show some interest again. And they do like these workouts, right? So various teams came into Ball State. Not only myself, but our kicker, a guy named John Dietrich, and another lineman, a guy named Mark Boggs, were drawing interest from the NFL. So these teams would come in, 3, 4, 5 teams that I can remember, and they would run us through the paces, right? They'd want to see us run a 40, they'd have us lift weights. And then interestingly enough, they'd have the big guys go into the gym and play basketball. They wanted to see us play basketball. They wanted to see us move laterally, see if we could jump, right? Just kind of test your athleticism, right? So that kind of all went on. And then, as things progressed and as we were moving towards the combine, I was so hopeful because the combine takes place in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I was just praying that, God, if there's any way that I could go to the combine and just show people that, I can walk and I can talk and I can chew bubble gum and I can play ball, maybe I'd have a shot, right? And of course, the combine's for invite only, and I didn't get an invitation. And so that thing just kind of moved forward, and I was really crestfallen. Come March, I start getting a bunch of correspondence again.
Ed, the important question is, what was your 40 time at the pro day?
5'2", baby.
All right. Bench press, how'd you do on the bench?
I had a damn good bench press. I think I did 2 1/4, 22 times.
Wow.
I did 310, I think 11 or 12 times.
Okay, so you felt good about the day. Now, the NFL draft in 1987 was nowhere near the spectacle that it is now, right, Neil?
No.
We were at the draft in Green Bay. It's crazy. 1987, it's a bunch of executives in a banquet room at a hotel, right?
Right.
But it also went 12 rounds.
Right.
So there's a big opportunity there. What kind of conversations are you having leading up to that draft? You talk about correspondence. Do those letters turn to phone calls?
Yeah, the letters started turning to phone calls. And, I started having phone calls and actually some campus visits post pro day, right? Where they come and work you out. Started having a few coaches come into town and talk with me. There was a guy named Art McNally from the Cincinnati Bengals. Art was a very well-recognized offensive line coach. And quite frankly, he was very, very interested and had feigned the thought process that maybe in the latter rounds, as you mentioned, 12 rounds, right? Maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe Cincinnati would pick me up, right? And so Cincinnati was out there kind of bubbling around. Detroit, Minnesota, Green Bay, and Dallas had feigned some interest, but never after pro day.
Is it a situation where, because you're at Ball State, it's technically a smaller school at the time, is it because of these teams just being regional? Is that why you're getting, like you said, they're all surrounding basically where you are in Indiana?
I really don't know. It's a fair question.
Why didn't the Dolphins? You could have ended up in Miami.
Yeah.
Did that?
I really don't know. Honestly, in retrospect, looking back, I think certain teams recruit in certain regions. And at the time, the globe wasn't as small as it is today. So I think their recruiters and, really the assistant coaches that would go out and make these visits, I think they had kind of their travels and their rounds, right? Where they went and who they talked to. And, the NFL is tremendously incestuous. These coaches have a grapevine. And people are talking to him, hey, you need to come take a look at this guy. You need to come see this person. I think this is a special person, right? And so for whatever reason, yeah, it was mostly Midwestern or Central region teams that had shown interest to me, but I really can't explain to you how, or why that happened.
But now you grew up, your high school is just outside of Gary, Indiana. Gary, obviously next to Chicago. What was your team growing up?
Oh man, we were Bears all day long, right?
All right. So what happens when Chicago doesn't call you, but the Green Bay Packers are on the phone?
So, that presented a little bit of a challenge at home, right? Before we started recording today, we were all talking about you guys all being Green Bay guys, and you understand the history and the lore and, all of the fanaticism around the Green Bay Packers, right? Well, I was the same way, but it was for the Bears, right? We knew George Halas and we knew the Bears, right? And the Bears were pretty darn good then. If you guys were, and so I was absolutely just in love with the Bears. In fact, my mother's brother, he had season tickets for the Bears. And every year my dad, myself, a couple of my cousins, and my uncle Charlie, we would go, and incidentally, Charlie played for the Philadelphia Eagles, but we would go to the Bears game. And this is when Dick Butkus was playing, Gale Sayers was playing, right? I mean, these were the good old days, right? And I have vivid memories of sitting in Soldier Field or sitting at home on Thanksgiving Day, because the Bears always played Detroit on Thanksgiving Day. And my dad and my Uncle Charlie would say, watch that Butkus guy, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was everything about the Bears. And I didn't really understand the Packers. I didn't appreciate the history. I didn't understand all the things that you guys knew as young men growing up in the Green Bay area.
To be fair, in the mid 80s, nobody quite understood the Packers, even in town, right? Now, 1987, though, Ed, your team, the Bears, is a year out of the Super Bowl, right? And they had a good season in 86. The Green Bay Packers are coming off a 4-12 season. And this is in an era when coaches would threaten players, shape up or I'm sending you to Green Bay. Green Bay calls, what are you thinking?
Like I said, there were several teams that had offered me a free agent contract. The difference with the Packers was because, honestly, guys, I played like 5 games my senior season. And so the Packers were the only team that wanted me to come up after the draft, participate in all of the mini camps, and actually, I think, have a legitimate shot of making the roster. All of the other teams didn't want me to come up until August, when training camp would start, or end of July, or whatever the date was. The money was pretty much neutral across all the teams, give or take a few $1,000. It was all about the same, right? But for the Packers, they wanted me to come up literally at the beginning of May. The draft was April 28th that year, and they wanted me to come up at the beginning of May. They wanted me to start working out with the team. They wanted me to start, attending meetings, doing all of those things. And so the way that I interpreted that was, hey, these guys are legitimately interested in me. I'm not just cannon fodder. I'm not somebody that's coming in for camp and going to be a big body to let their defense, whoop up on. They're going to give me a shot to make the team. So that's why I elected to come to Green Bay. And as you say, I really didn't know anything about Green Bay. As far as I knew, they were 12 hours away in the tundra, right? I mean,
So
even did you drive hours away from where I live, hell, I'd never been there. Shit, I was like, what the hell?
Did you drive in, or did you fly in your first time?
They flew us in.
Okay, well, that's good.
There's a funny story there too. I signed this free agent contract with Green Bay, and they invite me to the first mini camp, and that's when they want me to come up. From my home to O'Hare Airport, right, the biggest regional airport in my area, it's a 30-minute drive. So my folks dropped me off at O'Hare, and I'm coming up, and I'm going to be there for the mini camp. I'm going to be there for 4 or 5 days. So, I got an overnight bag, this kind of thing, and I have all my tickets, and, at the time, everything's paper, right? They put us up at the Midway Motor Lodge
nice.
Right? I mean, high dollar, right, brother? You are living. And
Woo!
I got my reservation at the Midway Motor Lodge and I got my tickets. I'm full of anticipation and a little bit of nervousness. And so I get to O'Hare and say so long to my folks, my dad, hey, good luck, give them hell. And so I find my gate and all of a sudden I start looking around and it's apparent that all the guys in the Midwest that the Packers have brought in, either draft picks or free agents, they're all in the same thing because there's only one flight from Chicago to Green Bay, right? It was so funny. Everybody's like puffing up, right? Everybody's, looking big and, putting on their best shot and Johnny Big Balls and that kind of thing, right? So we get on the flight and, I was a big guy. I was bigger then than I am now, right? And I personally was sitting in a coach seat, right? And if you guys remember, most of those flights were turboprop jets, right? I mean, wow, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
And so 2 seats on one side of the aisle and then 2 seats on the other side. And so I'm sitting next to this guy. I remember I come in and I go to sit down. And when I went to sit down, right, I go in and I hate to say it, but my ass wouldn't quite fit in. And hell, I hadn't flown a lot. The only times I had flown is when I was traveling with Ball State, and we maybe traveled 2 or 3 times a year, right? And so I was like, God damn, I could hardly fit in this freaking seat, right? And I got this guy sitting next to me, and he's obviously a specialty player. He's this little cutie, blonde hair, and he's sitting there in the chair. Turned out it was Don Mikowski, right? But anyway, so I'm trying to get in this chair, right? And this thing is like pinning me in. And so I just take my arms and I kind of push the 2 plastic arms. I break the armrest off of the flight, right? So Mikowski's like, it's the plane, So flight attendant comes back. Oh my God, now we got to delay the flight. We got to get somebody to come in here and repair it. But anyways, get on the flight and they repair the seat and off we go and, into Green Bay.
So now, Ed, you are an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
You are specifically a left tackle, right?
Yes.
You are now in Green Bay and your head coach is Forrest Gregg.
Yeah.
What's going through your mind? Tell me about meeting Forrest Gregg.
I'm certain that, he didn't do this special for me, but after they signed me, I think he made it out of principle a rule to call all of the players that were on the roster, right? So I remember getting a phone call. My wife and I were living in married housing in Muncie, Indiana, where Ball State is. And phone rings, and my wife says, "Oh, it's for you." And I was like, "Hello, this is Forrest Gregg." It's like, holy shit, this is Forrest Gregg, So I said, "Hey, coach, what's up?" And he goes, "Hey, young man," he goes, "we just signed you to a contract for the Green Bay Packers." And I'm like, "Oh, God, yeah, coach, I'm so thankful. I'm really looking forward to coming in and giving you my best shot." It was more subtleties. There was nothing in depth. There was nothing probing. And I think at the time, again, because I didn't appreciate guys like you do, the history there, right? I mean, it's like, okay, I know this guy's the head coach, but I didn't understand the history and the game and the impact that this guy has had on the game. Lombardi, I didn't know all that stuff, right?
You eventually learned it though, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. I learned it after the fact, but I didn't know it at the time. And so I remember that conversation because he told me, he said, "Hey, you're 6'8", right?" I said, "Yeah, 6'7", 6'8". And he said, "What are you weighing right now?" And I said, 310 or whatever I was. And he said, "I'd really like you to get up to 3.25." He said, "I want my tackles big." He goes, "You got any issues putting weight on?" I was like, good weight. Yeah. Bad weight. No, whatever. So he said, I'd really like you to, put another 10, 15, 20 pounds on if you can. And we'll see you at camp. Right. So, I mean, that was literally the first conversation. Look, guys, I'm a free agent, right? I'm not a draft pick. I'm not a prima donna. So he's not going to give me a huge amount of time. But that was literally the first conversation.
Once you get to Green Bay, so what does it look like, at the Motor Lodge, initially? But then, do you look for an apartment? Then do you talk to your wife? Like, okay, this is going to be at least a little stickier. So, where do you pick in Green Bay?
Yeah, didn't really know, Jeff. We were kind of taking it a day at a time. I get in, I get checked into the Midway Motor Lodge. I start going through minicamp. And like I said, they had already told me they wanted me to stay. So at that point, I did tell my wife, I said, "Listen, I think I'm going to try to find an apartment." So there was a guy who went to Oklahoma who was trying out for the Pack. His name was Travis Simpson. And he and I became buddies. And I said, hey, Trav, let's cut some cost and let's go get an apartment. So he and I did rent an apartment. I'll never forget it. It was the first lease I ever signed. Watermolen Enterprises, right? Right on the East River, the scenic East River, right? And so we rent this apartment. It wasn't actually too bad. And we were just kind of playing it by ear with my wife. And then as we progressed through mini camps and then the summer months, my wife would come up and visit me. Like I mentioned, she had already graduated, and my wife was an operating room nurse. And so she was actually working at Ball Hospital in Muncie, Indiana, and had a full-time job. And so she wasn't going to leave that job until we knew if something really was going to happen. So she would come up every couple of weeks through the course of that summer and come visit me. And even though I was making rookie pay, and even though I had a signing bonus, we had more money then than we have now, to be quite frank. But so she would come up and we would go up for a weekend to Door County. I mean, we were living large, man. We didn't have any kids, and life was good. And then as the mini camps progressed through the course of summer, and then as the actual training camp started, we made it through a couple of preseason games before I got cut. And she still was living in Muncie at Ball State in our married housing. I had graduated my undergraduate and I had started my master's degree, my MBA. And so my scholarship was still paying for our married housing apartment in Ball State. And so she was living there rent free. And then I got cut. I came home to Indiana, to my mom and dad's house first, and was just absolutely crestfallen. And I don't think I wanted to talk to anybody for about 2 days. And, it was shortly after that we got the phone call that, hey, there might be a strike and, we'd like you to come back up.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what training camp is like? Specifically, what is training camp like for an offensive lineman?
Yeah, 2 days are skull drudgery. Okay. I mean, it's a lot of hard work, right? We moved out of the Midway Motor Lodge. We moved into St. Norbert College. They have a phenomenal training table, and everybody heads over, whether you have your own vehicle, they have buses, whatever, but everybody goes over to, Lambeau Field. Lambeau Field at the time, man, you guys remember it. It looked like a galvanized garbage can, okay? It wasn't the second or the first, best stadium in the country, right? This thing was primitive, and the locker room wasn't much better. But we would head over early in the morning, 7:30. You'd get taped, you'd get your treatments if you needed treatment, and you'd get your clean gear for practice in the morning, and then you'd head over, whether you were a named guy who the young kids were trying to catch, with the bicycle, or a no-name guy like me who had to walk over all the time. And, you'd get over to the Hudson Center and you'd go through practice, right? And practice. A guy like me, honestly, realistically, I was probably number 2 at best. Likely, I was the guy who played the offensive lineman for the upcoming game. So I wasn't practicing as if I was going to play for the Packers. I was actually practicing to represent how, maybe the offense would line up and play plays against the opposing team.
You're there for 1 or 2 preseason games, you said?
Two preseason games, and then I got cut.
How much are you on the field in those 2 preseason games?
To be very frank with you, I played about 3 plays against Arizona in the second preseason game. So okay. Not much. That killed me.
But, yeah. This is kind of one of those stories of highs and lows, right? I mean, this is a great summer you've had, and the writing's on the wall there. At that point, though, are there any rumblings at that time of a pending strike or this concept of replacement players? Is there any of that talk going on before you leave town?
No, great question, but to the best of my recollection, none at all. At least nothing that was in my purview, right? I mean, guys, look, I'm a young guy. I know my chances are long to make this team, and I'm doing anything I can do to make a play, or even if it's on the practice field, to do something that's going to catch someone's eye to let me hang on for another week. And so all the discussion of any of the strife that was going on in the NFL and the players union and all that kind of stuff, none of that was on my radar, to be perfectly frank.
You mentioned that you connected with Travis Simpson. Are there other players from training camp that you really made connections with? Did you have any special interactions with Don Mikowski after breaking the seat rest, for example?
No, I mean, look, I was friendly with most of the guys, but we talked about this, Neil. I really enjoy hunting and fishing. And so Virgil Knight, who was our strength and conditioning coach on that team, he was a prolific hunter and fisherman and gun guy, so he and I kind of hit it off. Brian Noble was our middle linebacker. Brian was a big time hunter and fisherman. And so he and I and Verge, we'd gone out and hunted several times. You had texted me earlier today, John, about Jim Hobbins. And, during the strike season, not during the regular tryouts, Jim came in as a strike replacement player from Minnesota. And I got to know Jim, really well. I would tell you that I was friendly with all the guys on the team. I mean, our big name guys were, Ezra Johnson. I practiced against him every day. Tim Harris, you guys remember Timmy Harris? Tim Harris, awesome guy. He would tell me every day, hey, he always called me Coon. He said, hey, Coon, at the end of practice, if you want to stick around and practice a little pass pro, I'm happy to do that, right? And so I'm telling you, the guys there was a real camaraderie. And even though the team wasn't a great team by NFL standards, there was a real gel in the locker room and a real gel of all the guys. And because I was there through the whole summer and through a couple of preseason games, kind of felt like maybe I was a little different than maybe the average replacement player. Not that I'm better. Obviously, I wasn't because I didn't make the squad. But I think they felt like, hey, look, this guy's giving it a legitimate shot to make the team. And he's not just some Tom, Dick, or Harry that we pulled off the street to play.
Neil, Jeff, just for the background, Jim Hobbins is a Green Bay Preble graduate, graduated in 82. And then Jeff became a Minnesota Golden Gopher as well. And as you said, Ed, he joins you on this replacement squad. So let's jump ahead to that. Again, you're sent home. It's like, okay, we're letting you go after the second preseason game. You get home, you start to hear rumblings. Now you get a phone call about this concept of coming back and being a replacement player. But this is the team. They broke your heart, Ed.
Yeah.
What made you go running back to them?
I don't know if it necessarily broke my heart, right? I remember thinking, gosh, am I going to make it to the next preseason game? That was my goal, week to week to week, right? And we had a guy named Bert Gustafson who we nicknamed the Turk, right? And I remember I was in St. Norbert College. I was in Monday morning. Mondays, we didn't practice. We just did films and we did grays, which are just sanitary shorts and a half shirt, and just kind of ran around, kind of worked the kinks out after a game, including preseason. But Monday morning, for the guys that were on the bubble, that was the morning that you were either going to live to fight another day or you're going to get cut, right? So I remember I was at breakfast and I remember Bert walking around and he was tapping various guys, right? And so you almost wanted to hide, right? Because it was like, son of a gun. If Bert taps me, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to go collect my things, my playbook. I'll go meet with the coaching staff and I'm out, right? And he actually missed me on that Monday morning. So I thought, man, I made it. I'm going to make another week. That was my goal, week to week, right? And I remember I was in the locker room and I was getting ready for practice and films on Monday morning after we had breakfast, and Bert catches me in the locker room, right? And he taps me and he says, hey, dude, I'm sorry. He said, Forrest wants to meet with you, right? So go in and meet with Forrest. And I'm telling you, I was ready to give him the business. I was ready to tell him, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. You don't understand. I can make a contribution to this team, right? I get in there, I can't say a word, right? And he, tells me, hey, it's been great. Thank you. Really appreciate it. You're not up to standard and we're going to let you go. And they give you a stipend, they give you a little check and then they collect your playbook and then they put you on what's called the waiver wire for, I don't know, a couple of weeks or something. And if you don't get picked up, you're done. So anyways, I got cut. I ended up coming home. I drove home. I didn't fly home because now it's on my nickel, not their nickel. So I remember driving home and I was just, what the hell am I going to do? And, I was home for a couple of 2-3 weeks. I think I even actually had a regular interview because my wife was like, hey, look, you got to go get a job, dude. You're either going to go try out again someplace or you got to get a job, but we got to live. And so I remember she and I were talking a little bit. She's got a full-time job. I started to interview a little bit. And then all of a sudden there's talk of this strike. And I remember talking with my father. My dad was a union plumber his whole life. And when I was a kid, we were a blue collar family. No one else in my family went to college. I only went because I had an athletic scholarship. And it was a big deal for my dad that if this thing came about and you were given an opportunity, would you choose to cross a labor union line, even though it's football, right? Principle is principle, and my dad was a man of principle. World War II veteran, you can maybe see his flag back there, right? And combat wounded veteran, I mean, just an enormous inspiration in my life. And I told my dad, I said, I get it, but if somebody calls and they want me to play, I want to play football. And if this is an opportunity for me to showcase some of my capabilities, then I'm all for it. Right. And, much to my father's credit, he supported me in that endeavor. And so it was shortly thereafter that, sure enough, I get a call and they said, hey, we're going to go ahead and build out a roster with strike replacement players. Would you be interested to come back up to Green Bay? And so I said, heck yeah. So then I flew back up to Green Bay for my second time.
Now, there's not a lot of pomp and circumstance really that goes with this, but were there really guys like when you talk about a picket line carrying the signs or the sandwich boards and stomping their feet? Did you actually have to cross a picket line?
Yes and no. Like I said, because I had several months with these guys, they got to know me as an individual, right? And I'll be honest, I was never confronted with any type of vitriol or ill will. Nobody ever really gave me a hard time. There were other people that when they came through, nothing ever came to fisticuffs or physical, but there were words, right? And there was different things that were said, but it never really got nasty. But the guys would stand out there with their signs and, the scab and this and that and all those types of things. And so when you would come into the parking lot before you went up into the locker room, you had to go through that. And certain individuals, there were maybe 3 or 4 of us that had a similar experience that I had, that it was almost like, hey, man, how you doing? What's going on? Hope you're doing well. Good luck, that type of thing. And then the other guys, it was more the superficial, hey, you got no business being here, you scab, blah, 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 blah. But it was never physical.
I don't remember this, Neil and Jeff. This is one of those things where I wish we had some kind of knowledge at the moment. We could have gone over there and taken some pictures of like Ezra Johnson and Brian Noble carrying picket signs walking around the stadium.
One of the guys.
John, we were too focused on like playing high school football and being high school seniors at the time. So.
One of the guys that I remember who was probably most animated in this was Ken Ruckers. Do you guys remember Ruckers?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Rutgers came out of USC. And incidentally, Rutgers, after the NFL, he ended up somehow getting hooked up with Rush Limbaugh. And he was very politically oriented. So no surprise that he was one of the most vocal guys, in the whole strike line.
And plus, this wasn't, Philadelphia or other places where
big marketplaces,
Exactly. Or where there was this really pledge to the unions.
I don't know that I agree with you, Jeff. I mean, Green Bay is absolutely a union team.
So. Yeah. Paper mills and all of that. But it honestly, guys, I saw the same news flicks that you guys saw. It just wasn't that way here. There was a level of decorum and now who knows? It's foggy. Gosh, guys, that's 30 years ago. Who knows?
So tell us about this first practice that you have as this entire group of people that have been cobbled together to be replacement players.
Looking back on it, this is where the brilliance of, I think, Forrest Gregg started to show up. Forrest, he was a Neanderthal. You think about smash mouth football, right? that's this guy, right? This is a guy who Lombardi said was the best offensive lineman I've ever had the opportunity to coach or be around, right? But those skills and those abilities didn't translate into the game in 1987 or thereafter. Obviously, if you look at the Packers record, right? That's when we started to have the wide open offense. That's when we started to have the West Coast offense and all those things. And Forrest, he just couldn't let go. We're just going to grind it out in the dirt, right? 4 downs and a pool of dust, and, we'll get a first down, right? But the one thing that Forrest could do is he could appeal to your emotion. And so when you bring together a group of young men like this who have this idyllic dream, however crazy it might be that I might be able to play in the NFL, he really tapped into that. And he would tap into his Lombardiisms, and he would tap into his emotion, and he really appealed to the emotional side. When I was in high school, and I think about the emotion of the game in high school, it's more emotion than it is physical talent in high school. And when you get to college, depending on the level, there's a balance of emotion and physical talent. And the higher the grade of football, a little more physical talent, right? But the emotion is still there. When you get to the NFL, and thinking back on this and also being a professional business person, it's less about emotion and more about your ability to tap into a special gear that says, hey, I'm a professional. I have these skills and capabilities. I've been blessed with God-given strength, speed, and agility, and it's time for me to perform. And it's not so much emotional, right? But I think Forrest knew, for lack of a better term, I got these college guys who dream of being in the NFL. And if I can crank their emotional gear, we're going to play. And we may not know what the hell we're doing, but by God, we're going to be flying around and we're going to play football and we're going to have some fun. And so I think that was the genius of Forrest in the strike squad.
So Ed, in this role, you're the left tackle. You are the starting left tackle of the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah.
And you play 3 full games with this team. In that first week, second week, even though it's replacement ball and things like that, are you feeling like you're on top of the world? Are you saying, hey, I am on this team?
I didn't understand the lore of Lambeau Field.
Okay.
But, and John, I sent you some photos, and different things like that, right? I mean, I've played a couple of games in Lambeau Field, right? And, I've been very blessed in my professional career after football. And my wife and I and my kids, we get to go to any and all games we want to go to. And, I oftentimes sit there in the stadium and I realize that I'm not, a legit NFL player, but I sit
Yes,
there.
you are.
I often wonder how many other people in this stadium of 75 or 80,000 people have actually played a football game on Lambeau Field. And
now, your first game is at the Metrodome in front of
Minneapolis.
Barely 14,000 people. Okay.
Yeah.
How empty was this stadium? Was there a lot of echoing going on in the building while you guys are playing?
To be perfectly honest with you, for me, I get so engaged in the game, I don't even have a recollection of that. I just remember
just like tunnel vision, and that was
I mean, I got a role, I got a position, I got a job, I got play to play, and and here we go, right? Look, the stands were never full, but to be very honest, at a mid-major Division I school like Ball State, our stands were never full, right? So for me, I didn't play the game for the full stands, right? I didn't play the game to be on TV. I played the game because I love to play the game. And more importantly, I love being part of the team. That was my jam. I mean, being part of the team, being part of the locker room, cutting up with the guys in and out of practice. I mean, that's what I miss about football.
The Packers were successful during the 3 games that you played with it. You went 2-1, and the one loss was an overtime loss. And you were the left tackle, and you described how Forrest Gregg knew how to inspire people, and the rushing game seemed to be the core for your team. First game, you had 147 rushing yards. Second game, 151. Third game, 175. The Packers had 473 rushing yards with you as the left tackle. Tell us a little about that.
Look, my bane of my existence was pass pro. And, when you, again, play at a Ball State, you don't have the premier edge rushers like you might have in the other, the SEC and maybe the Big Ten and some of the other, big schools. And I often think about this, right? I was, 6'7", I was pretty strong. I had decent athleticism. Run game was not my issue, right? If I needed to move this guy here or there, I could do that. It was the edge rusher who would line up like a Black Panther, three positions out from me and run around me and leave me in the dust, and I'm doing the lookout block, right? Look out, here he comes, right? Because I didn't even lay a hand on him. And honestly, even in the strike game, I don't want to take anything away from the talent of those guys. A lot of those guys were good, if not great, collegiate players that for whatever reason just didn't have their opportunity. And the run game in the NFL is different than it was at Ball State. I can speak for that just because that's my experience. You didn't really have to sustain your block very long. If you got in somebody's way, right, and you were able to occupy them for a fleet of seconds, the running backs were agile enough and good enough that they could find that hole. And, it was different even in the strike season. That was a level up from the caliber of play that I was accustomed to at Ball State. So the run game, not my issue. It was my pass pro that I struggled with.
But the run game was very effective with you as the left tackle. So what was your favorite play or your best play? What is the most memorable play from your Packers career?
Here's something that's crazy. I talk with guys, whether they had my experience, a greater experience and played in the NFL or no NFL experience. Some guys can tell you every single play that they played in. I don't understand that. I never have been able to do that. I can't even hardly remember, high school or college games, right? Maybe one or two. But I do remember the very last play that I ever played organized football, in a uniform, and it was for the Packers, and it was against Philadelphia. And it was the very last play that I ever played in. And Keith Euchre, one of the few guys who was on the Packers regular season roster, who was from Auburn, and he made the regular season roster by the skin of his teeth, he decided to cross the picket line and play. So he was the left guard. I was the left tackle. And we were tied up with Philadelphia. It was on the Packers' north end zone. And we called an X block, which I come down first, and then he steps behind me and he kicks out on the end. I crash down on the tackle, and theoretically we open it up. And then the running back comes up and hits the middle linebacker. At least that's how it's drawn on paper to go to the post, right? And I sent John a picture of that play because the Press Gazette caught that play, and I'm coming down and crashed the tackle and actually took out two guys. And Euchre came behind me and kicked out the end, and James Hargrove took it in for a touchdown in the win. So that was the very last play that I ever played in. And the Press Gazette caught that in a photo. And my wife, who is very kind and a considerate individual, had that blown up. And it's back here actually in my office. So
critical block on a game-winning touchdown in overtime. That sounds like a perfect way to end if it's got to end.
Yeah. So it was pretty cool. But I just don't get it, man. Some guys can remember, every little thing. And I just, I don't know, maybe it's been knocked out of me, or maybe I've killed too many with Julian Sowers. But
I think there's a part of it I played offensive line in high school. And I think for the line guys, the plays look a lot more similar to one another than if you're one of the quote unquote skill position where you're seeing everything happening at once. Your job is to knock somebody out.
It's not quite as sensational, right? To smash mouth every play is not quite as sensational as some of these other guys, but it's the end result that counts.
Ed, what about the business side of football? Now, this is, like we said, you're a replacement player.
Yeah.
The whole squabble is between the owners and the players about money, right? I'm pretty sure you didn't come in and sign a multi-million-dollar contract to play left tackle for the Green Bay
Yeah.
Packers. But did they treat you well during that 24 days in Green Bay?
Let's get this right off the bat. I would have paid them to play. Okay. For me, it had nothing to do with the remuneration, nothing to do with the money, right? And anything they would have given me, that was a bonus. To put things in context, I think the Packers in 1987 signed their first $1 million contract, and it was with a guy named Brent Fullwood. And Brent Fullwood came out of, I think it was Auburn. He was their number one draft pick. He was a running back. Good guy, awesome athlete, not the brightest dude on the planet. But anyways, I could tell you some stories there. But I think at the time, a minimum first year rookie salary was like $50K. Guys, it pales in comparison to the monies that the guys have the ability to make today. I think today it's like $750,000. My first year contract, I think, was 60 and 80. It might have been 65 and 85 or something like that. So I signed a 2-year deal, and then I got a $10,000 signing bonus. So that's what I got as an undrafted free agent to come into Green Bay. So I got the 10K up front, and then for each game that I suited up, not preseason, but the 3 strike games, I got 1/16 of your full year salary. But in 1987, that was a lot of dough, guys, and I had a 10K signing bonus, and then all through camp, I made $750 a week is what they paid me. I came up, I think it was like May 1st or something like that. So from May through, the middle of August when I got cut, they were paying me $750 a week. And they covered my room and board.
So now, Jeff, you gave us the history of these 3 weeks. It's 24 days total you're with the team. And the strike is settled, but you still played that third game because you guys practice all week. But it's pretty anticlimactic, right? How does it end?
Remember, they told us, guys, the strike has been settled. And look, let's be realistic, right? The reason why they want to publish a game, is the television revenues and the marketing revenues and all the dough, right? Mm-hmm. And they just literally didn't have enough time to get the regular players back into the camp. Looking back on this, I didn't understand it at the time, but looking back on this, right, it was like, look, we're going to put another game on. There are 16 games, at that point in time. They only played 15 that year. So they didn't want to lose the revenues, even if they were less than normal revenues, right? They want to lose those revenues. So when they settled the strike, I don't remember, heck, if it was Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or when it was, right? It was like, look, we're going to play this last game. And so we're going to field you guys on the squad. And then there was an opportunity for, I don't know, I think there was maybe 8 players that they kept around in an evaluation phase. And I was one of those guys. So I got to stick around for like another week, for lack of a better term, like a practice squad. But talk about anticlimactic. That was really anticlimactic, right? I don't even think I showed up at the locker room, right? I was just in this limbo capacity for a week. A couple of guys stuck around for a few weeks, and then, I got sent home again. So at that point, I joked about it. I when I went home the second time, I'm like, man, I got cut from the same team 2 times in 1 year, right? So I guess that's the finality. And, I had some opportunities. People stayed in touch with me. I stayed in shape. I tried to keep myself fit, and I didn't, drop a whole bunch of weight or anything like that. And somewhat thought maybe I would try again. But to be very honest with you guys, you'll remember this because you're as old as I am, maybe not quite as old. All the players, they would show what they called the transactions in the newspaper, right? The black and white print newspapers. And I remember through the course of the NFL season, and particularly through August and then into early days of the season, I would watch those transactions because I would see guys that I had played with or guys that I knew their names, and I would see them coming and going from these NFL teams, right? And I remember thinking to myself, after I had my little glorified cup of coffee with the Packers, and I was getting courted by a few more teams to try out the next year, I thought, I don't want to be one of those guys that every year show up in the transactions, that tried out, was on the squad for 8 weeks, didn't make it, got let loose. The next year he's in the transactions, he tried out for this team. And so at that point, guys, I had an education. I'd like to think I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack, but I do okay. And I had a decent education.
And I've talked to you, I've met you in person. That's why you're here talking to us. I know that you downplay this. You are a very humble person, but we have the media guide. We have the 1987 yearbook. Your name is in those books. That can never be taken away from you. You were a Green Bay Packer.
Logically, I can't disagree with that, but I think there's this code amongst the players, right? And when you reach that echelon and you truly reach it and you play a complete NFL season, guys, that is you just can't even begin to understand the accomplishment that is. At least that's the way my mind thinks of it. And I didn't do that, right? I had a great opportunity. I gave it everything that I had. And, at the end of the day, it didn't work out, right? And so I have such a respect for any guy that makes an NFL roster. I don't care the position. You just don't even understand the hard work, the dedication, the skill, the capability, the perseverance, the breaks, whatever it is, they made it. I didn't. And so I don't ever want to put myself on that plane, even though you can look in a media guide, even though you can look on this, that, or the other. To me, I would be doing a disservice to the guys that truly make it, let alone for 1 year. Think about the doggone guys that make it 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 years in the NFL. I just can't even believe that. And that wasn't me. Now, I have excelled in other areas of my life, and so I've come to terms with this, and I'm very content. And this was a great time in my life, but I never try to take any liberty with it.
To be fair, though, there was almost certainly some bias against the replacement players after the striking players came back, and you distinguished yourself during your time with the Packers. And there's one sort of thing as I went through those games that with other than the 473 rushing yards, which is noteworthy, and those Packers teams in the replacement games had a lot of penalties. There was one game they had 11 penalties, 114 yards. You're recorded as having 0 penalties for the Packers. So you were distinguishing yourself both as a left tackle and somebody who was playing the game the way it's supposed to be played. And quite frankly, the Packers right now could use somebody at the offensive line who's not making those types of penalties.
Where were you 30 years ago, Bob?
But also going to sort of the difficulty of the game. So you go to Pro Football Reference and you've got a career AV of 2. And just to compare, there are other well-known Packers players who didn't reach that level, talking about how difficult the game is. Amari Rodgers, second-round pick in 2020, career AV of 2. Aaron Ripkowski, Rip. Justin Harrell, 2007 first-round draft pick. Fred Vinson, 99 second-round draft pick. You've got the same career AV as all of those people. And you got a better career AV than B.J. Sander, Jay Sternberger, and former Brett Favre backup Craig Nall, who are all at one. So you've made accomplishments, and the accomplishments are recognized in pro football history.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. So thank you.
And going back to my point, too, I keep thinking of the movie Field of Dreams and the conversation with Doc Graham. And to paraphrase, all these years ago, you came within 5 minutes. You came this close, so close that it would kill most men to not touch that dream. Doc Graham comes back and says, if I had only gotten to be a doctor for 5 minutes, that would have been the tragedy.
Yeah.
What else goes on in your life, Ed? You were studying computer science at the burgeoning days of computer science. Tell us about your life. Where does the success in your life now come in?
My wife, after the strike season, she had come up for all those games, as did my family and some very close friends of mine. So it was a lot of fun those 3 weeks, right? I mean, we were just having a ball. And those games were played on television. So I was getting a lot of phone calls through the week from family and friends who, hey, I saw you here, I saw you there. or I saw your butt up in Minnesota because you're in the huddle. So those were, I'd be lying to you if even now I kind of get a little electric, thinking about some of that stuff. But when I got cut then on the strike side of it, and then I was pretty much sure I was going to be done with football, right? That was a big decision. I called my wife who lived in Indiana and I said, hey, I'll tell you what, I could live here in Green Bay. I said, this place up here is pretty special. I don't want to live back home. Everybody's got to be from someplace. We were from Gary, Indiana. I really don't want to live there, even though all our family's there. No offense to our family. We were a very close family, both my wife and I. And thank God, she said, let's do it. Let's move to Green Bay. So two very good friends of mine rented a big U-Haul truck and they went to Muncie, Indiana to our apartment and they loaded all of our stuff in the truck. And one of them drove a car. My wife had a car and she rode with the other guy in the U-Haul and they drove up here and we rented a duplex. And my wife was an operating room nurse. She got a job at Bell and Health like overnight. And so that kind of took the pressure off and we rented a duplex. And so then I started, interviewing. Okay, what am I going to do? And I knew how to computer program. Why? I'll never know why I decided to study computer science, but it was kind of a hard thing, kind of a futuristic thing. And my dad said, hey, look, if somebody's going to pay for it, you might as well do something difficult. You're good at math. Just go ahead and give it a go. And if you make it, great. And if you don't, no big deal, And so I can't tell you I liked it, but I did okay, and I got through it. And which was unheard of to be a Division I athlete and to make it through with, a math and a computer science degree. And then I was, an academic, recognized athlete and that type of thing. So once I started actually going out trying to find some professional jobs, people were interested. Probably, just like you guys, hey, tell me about this Packer experience, if nothing else, right? And I'm like, hey, wait a minute, but I got some brains here, So anyways, I actually took a job initially. Judge Perrins, if you remember, was the president of the Packers at the time. And I told him, he asked me, he said, what are you going to do, Big Ed? And I said, Judge, we're staying in town. We love Green Bay and we want to stay here. He goes, great. Can I help you find a job? And I said, I would love it. So he knew a guy named Bill Brault who worked at the Green Bay Visitor and Convention Bureau, and they were just starting to computerize. And so long story short, I ended up my first job for about a year. I worked at the Green Bay Visitor and Convention Bureau, and I set up their first computer system. And I'll never forget it because we had 9 major hotels in the area, and I had to set those all up so that when conventions would come in, it would check the availability across all the rooms and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, my little claim to fame. And my sister, I have 4 brothers and sisters. My oldest sister worked at IBM. And she said, hey, she goes, I think you need to think about getting a job at IBM. And I was like, look, I'm a slacky compared to what IBM hires, right? I mean, I went to Ball State, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, long story short, she got me an interview, which led to another interview, which led to another interview. And I got hired on as a technician at IBM here in Green Bay. And about a week into the job, my boss comes up to me and he goes, listen, he goes, you're not a technician, you're a salesman. You know how to talk with people. You can relate to people and you've got a great story and you're interesting. We want to send you off to become an IBM salesman. So that's what I did for 10 years and had infinite success, just really loved that job. And then my manager and I left. We started a business and we sold that business to a global organization, which I will retire from at the end of this year. So my professional career has been a real bright spot for me. I'm very fortunate. And I would have never in a million years been able to tell you that this is what I was going to do. But, one door closes, another door opens, and, you just work hard and good things happen.
One of the reasons that Wisconsin appealed to you is because you love hunting and fishing. You mentioned that with Brian Noe. Tell us about your favorite adventures in Wisconsin. What is it about Wisconsin hunting or fishing that continues to draw you in, right? You shot a buck today. What is it that makes you so connected to the land and the water in this way?
My dad was a Purple Heart, combat wounded veteran in World War II. and, an enormous figure in my life. And when my dad came back from the war, obviously I wasn't born yet. He said, I'll never touch another gun as long as I'm around. But my dad went on to have 3 daughters and 2 boys. And even if it's stereotypical, we had a neighbor that lived next door to us in Indiana where we grew up who hunted all the time. And my brother and I always were after my dad. We want to hunt. We want to hunt. And he was no guns, no guns, no guns, And I don't know, we were probably about 13 or 14. And I remember for Christmas, he bought my brother and I a gun. That was our Christmas present. And then we had an uncle who lived in a more rural area of Indiana. And sometimes we would go down to Uncle Harry's farm, and my dad would never carry a gun, but he would supervise my brother and I walking in the fields, and we would rabbit hunt or bird hunt or, whatever was available. And for whatever reason, I just so enjoy that. I like being outside. It's not about killing things. It's about being outside and the pursuit. And again, much like football, everything that I do hunting and fishing wise, it's with other people, and I build this camaraderie and this tight kinship. And to me, that's what it's all about. And so when I moved up to Wisconsin, different than Indiana, I didn't have to drive any place to hunt or fish. It was right here. I literally could go 5 minutes north of the stadium, and I could fish on world-class perch fishing on Green Bay. I could go to Armstrong Creek 2 hours from here and bow hunt till my heart's content and never see another person. It was because of that type of environment that I told my wife, I said, God, I could live here. And I'm just so blessed that she agreed. Here she is going to leave her family. She's not into hunting and fishing, and why she ever moved here is beyond me. But I was fortunate enough to convince her to do so. And the hunting and fishing has done nothing but, my God, explode ever since. I mean, we're blessed. I've had a lot of good fortune in my life. We own a place up north. I own a place in South Dakota. This morning, I shot a buck right here in my backyard. I own some property here, and I walked out at 5:45 this morning, and by 6:45 this morning, I was gutting a deer, So I don't know why, guys. For whatever reason, man, that bug has bit me, and it has bit me in a big way.
That is beautiful.
And Ed, I think we're thankful that you're still in Green Bay. I'm very happy that I got to meet you. We share some commonality in the local area. That's great. Now, let's talk about your continued love for the Green Bay Packers. What do you like about this team right now this season? And are you ready for the next game?
You asked me earlier, my gosh, when they called you back to play in the strike team and they broke your heart, how could you say yes and come back, right? I was more bitter after time kind of settled in, because for probably 2 or 3 years, I was like, I'm better than that guy. I know that guy. I could do that. I could do this, right? And so there was this level of animosity that I had. And to be honest with you, I wasn't a big Green Bay Packer fan. But that all changed once I started having kids. And then they went to the Super Bowl with Brett Favre, right? Yep. And my God, that year, how could you not, right? If you lived in this town, if you got a pulse, right? If you could watch the games and be part of those, whether you're in person on television or listening to it on the radio, and not become a Green Bay Packer fan. And then to this day, I can remember, being on Webster Avenue when the guys came back from the Super Bowl and were on the buses, right? And the streets are lined with people and snow and everybody's having a great time. And I think it was at that moment forward that I was like, this is my team. I had an opportunity to be part of this. These guys are the best of the best. And from this point forward, as an example to my kids and everybody else, the Packers are king. That's probably when I really quit paying attention to anybody else. And, I wouldn't tell you that, like, if the Packers lose like they did, on Sunday, it ruins my day. I'm invested in the game. It's not unlike me to miss a game if I have a great opportunity to go hunting or fishing. So the Packers aren't first in my list of priorities, but we do treat it like a social venue. I've been in business my whole life, and there's a lot of people that, want to come here and experience Lambeau. And I get a hoot out of doing that. We'll rent a Packer party house, bring people in, show them what it's like Green Bay style. And my kids and my wife and I, we have opportunities to go to games. And so we have friends coming in on the Philly game, which I think is the Monday night game.
Yeah.
And we're going to host them for dinner on Sunday. They're flying in Milwaukee on Saturday. They're going to come here on Sunday, have dinner and, have cocktails. And they're from Texas, by the way, and they're great Packer fans. And then we're going to go to the game on Monday. We'll see what happens. I don't know. The first two games of this year, I thought the Packers were going to win every game of the year. I was just like, these guys are on fire. Love got the ball on a string. My God, Tucker Kraft, unbelievable, right? Then Micah Parsons comes in. I was on top of the world. And then they go down to Cleveland and get their pants beat off, right? And it was like, maybe they're not as good as I thought they were. And then, the next game, I think they won, but lackluster. And now this last week, it was just like, come on, guys, what's going on? I don't know. It's not win or lose, not life or death for me if they win or lose. But I do enjoy going and being part of that whole festive environment.
Well, Ed, we are the official podcast of the Lot 1 Tailgate Party, so you and your friends are absolutely invited to join us Monday as we get ready for the Packers-Eagles matchup.
Now, we'll be there and we'll have some fun because that's one thing Big Ed does. Big Ed has a lot of fun.
Excellent.
Well, Ed, we look forward to sharing time with you, having fun after the podcast as well. Neil, really, I can tell, is ready to go hunting with you. He's I can see the wheels turning there, Neil.
Hey, whatever you want to do, Neil. I snow goose hunt. This year I've snow goose hunt, and then we went dove hunting in South Dakota in September. I've been duck hunting this year, partridge hunting this year, deer hunting this year, pheasant hunting this year. I'm going to South Dakota in 2 weeks for a week for duck and pheasant. I'm blessed. Life is good.
Ed, we appreciate you joining us. You shared a very special story with us, a very unique situation. You being a Green Bay Packer, thank you for being part of the podcast.
Yeah, well, guys, thank you. I'm flattered. It was a great and special time in my life, and it was fun to tell the story, and I hope I didn't misrepresent it in any way.
We really appreciated it, Ed. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for
the rest of you. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe and leave a comment. You can find the GBC Podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Blue Sky, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And we are on Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. Please follow us on all of those social media platforms, and may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.